Before we start today's episode, I want to start with a trigger warning because we're going to be talking about pregnancy loss and miscarriage today. I want to acknowledge that this is a sensitive topic that may bring up strong emotions for some listeners. If at any point you feel the need to pause or take a break, please do so. Welcome back to Prehumans for another episode of my Fertility Podcast. If you recall, in episode 43, we talked about the symptoms, diagnosis, types, and causes of a miscarriage. And in episode 46, we talked about management options. Today, we're going to step away from the medicine and we're going to dig into the psychological and emotional aspects of having a miscarriage. This is huge. This is really important. It cannot be understated. Yeah, and it's way more of an emotional event than a physical event, I would argue, in the vast majority of cases. For sure. The psychological impact of miscarriage can be profound and can also be long-lasting, and it can show up in so many aspects of your life and your future fertility journey, wherever that may be. And so just as we spent a lot of time talking about the bleeding and the cramping and all of this, I think that it's important to spend as much time talking about the emotional and the psychological impacts, and to, above all, validate people and their experiences. Yeah, miscarriage is the loss of a dream. I mean, that is the best way to put it. And grief is the most common response to a miscarriage. And grief can come in so many forms. It can be anger, it can be guilt, it can be an overwhelming sense of loss. It can even be a bit of relief, depending on how long the miscarriage was going on, if you were worried about some health issues with the baby, and that can make things sometimes difficult to process. Certainly, there's lots of research that shows that a miscarriage can be an inciting event for somebody developing depression, developing an anxiety disorder, and even in some cases, actually developing post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Oftentimes, we think about PTSD as happening to somebody who has gone through war, some sort of life-threatening situation, but that doesn't have to be the case. It can be really the trauma and the stress associated with it can lead to many symptoms of PTSD and that diagnosis of PTSD. And these things can develop shortly after the loss, or even many months later at a time where you have, physically recovered, but you're still not there emotionally. And so, again, to go back to this idea of validating, when you are experiencing those emotions or those feelings, whenever that is, it's so crucial to seek help if you're finding these feelings are becoming overwhelming. Miscarriages can also have an effect on relationships. I don't want to generalize, but I would say that sometimes women are sad about the miscarriage and they're very concerned with the loss, while men are concerned with the health of their partner. Mm-hmm. So sometimes this can make it seem like, the male partner does not care as much about the pregnancy, and it's just because they're just so worried about what their partner is going through. So I think communication is important, and just being able to be there for each other and to acknowledge is that the experience of miscarriage, even though it's happening to both of you, can actually feel differently for each partner in a relationship. Mm-hmm. Another thing I think that's really important to acknowledge is that miscarriage and those emotional scars can have long-term effects. For instance, somebody who has experienced recurrent miscarriages, or those who've had miscarriages later on in pregnancy or earlier in pregnancy, can really struggle with ongoing grief, fear, so much fear, and so much anxiety in subsequent pregnancies. And I mean, we see that all the time where we may have patients who are very motivated to have a healthy pregnancy and to build their family, but really struggle with moving forward with fertility treatment or doing another embryo transfer because of this overwhelming fear and anxiety that bad thing, that the miscarriage can happen again. And then again, when I see patients who've had a miscarriage, I do talk to them about the subsequent pregnancy, and I say,
even if everything goes perfectly, like textbook in your next pregnancy, your anxiety will be through the roof for the duration of probably the first trimester. And it has nothing to do with the events that are happening in that moment. It's really about your previous experience, the anxiety that you're bringing into this pregnancy. And I always encourage patients to think about how they're going to deal with that. Think about how you're going to process it. Think about what you're going to do to help you get through that. Because for anyone, it's so much easier to think about these things, to think outside of your own body, the feelings that you have before you get there, right? If you know, you know what, I know that my pregnancy ultrasound is happening. My viability ultrasound is going to happen on this day. I'm going to be sure to book an appointment with my therapist for, that day or the following day. So that pre-planning, I think, is really important. And that time between pregnancies is the time to address that and to talk about that.
And we'd recognize that. So we do sometimes order ultrasounds a little earlier than they should because we know how anxious our patients can be. Maybe we might order an extra ultrasound because we know that sometimes anxiety can get the best of you. And it's not because you're difficult or because you're weak or because you're quote unquote crazy. It's just this is a real phenomenon. And it doesn't matter how many times someone might tell you that everything is okay and that miscarriage is unlikely to happen. The fact that it has happened to you, really the brain remembers and the body remembers. Another thing that we do here at American Fertility Center is you may know that we like to celebrate our babies and we give them a little outfit, but we also want to be there for you in the tough times when you're having a miscarriage. So we have a card that we send to our patients when they've had a miscarriage with a handwritten note from your care team, just to let you know that we might see you for a moment of time where we're managing the miscarriage, but to let you know that we recognize how hard it is and that we're thinking of you. And another note in terms of the comment of having a stress response to the miscarriage, sometimes I have patients tell me, I can't go back in the room where I had my diagnosis, the room where my doctor told me I had a miscarriage. And we get that. So if a patient has identified that being in that room is difficult for them, we make a note. And when they're coming back for another ultrasound, we make sure that they don't go back to the same room. So if you're a patient at American Fertility Center and you have had a miscarriage and you feel that there are certain things around the clinic that could be triggering for you because you experienced a miscarriage in that context, make sure that you let us know and we'll do whatever we can to accommodate that in a subsequent pregnancy.
While the emotional impact is significant, support systems and coping mechanisms can play such a crucial role in helping individuals and or couples to navigate this difficult experience. And so number one is really having the support during and after a miscarriage is so essential. And it can come from many different facets or groups of your life. Us as the fertility physicians, as your physicians, we're often the first line of support. We're often the ones who are seeing you and telling you, breaking the bad news, so to speak. We work to offer medical advice, of course, but also emotional support and some resources for dealing with the loss. I hope that this podcast will become a resource for patients in the future. And that's why it's so important to have a good relationship to build that good rapport with your provider.
This would be a good time to shout out Oasis Fertility Support Network. We interview them on episode 13. They are an amazing support group created by people that have been through fertility or infertility or miscarriages. And they try to create a safe space for women who are going through that as well. This is completely free. It's a nonprofit organization that it's really amazing in providing support to anyone going through infertility and miscarriages because it's hard to understand the experience unless you've been through it. We also had some other guests in our episodes that have spoken to miscarriage and who are active on social media. And they have indicated that they tend to also be available to be contacted for this. And that would be Bianca, the host of My Fertility Journey podcast. She was interviewed on episode 35, Brandy Williams with Be Well with Brandy on episode 12, Renee Higgins on Instagram, de.baby.plan on episode 23, and Christina Vera with Fresh Insights, who was on episode 9. She's also a psychotherapist and counselor that has experience in counseling people about infertility and miscarriages.
Speaking of Christina Vero, she had this fabulous phrase that she used called disenfranchised grief. And I'm still thinking about it so many months after recording the episode with her. Please go listen to her episode because she explains it way better than I'm about to. But it's this idea that when you have a loss, if someone in your family passes away, society has given you the permission to experience that grief. You know, if somebody passes away, there's a funeral, there's a ceremony, there's steps of grieving that we do publicly that are accepted as a society. But in a situation where somebody has a miscarriage, it's still kind of taboo a little bit to talk about, especially when it comes to things like outside of your close circle or even with your employer, for instance. And it's really unfortunate that that is that case. And it's this disenfranchised grief, meaning that you're experiencing the grief, but you don't necessarily have a way to express it in a way that allows other people to know what to do with it, to know how to support you. And that can be really, really challenging.
Yeah, there is a lot of taboo when talking about miscarriage. And I'm always amazed at the things my patients tell me that other people have told them when they've had a miscarriage. So let's go through some of the things that you've heard from our patients that they have heard about having a miscarriage. I could think of one. Oh, at least it's not a big deal because it was really early.
Oh, yeah. That one is probably a common one. And that one really just, it's like you just put the knife in and you just like twist a little bit.
Or even worse, well, at least you know you can't get pregnant. Duh.
Yeah. Another common one I hear is something like, well, you know, the baby probably was going to be sick or unhealthy anyways, which is not helpful at all. It might be true, as we talked about, in causes of miscarriage, but it's not the thing to say to someone.
No, absolutely not. Or, you know, when people say, I had a friend of a friend who had a miscarriage and then she went on to have 3 babies, which, I mean, that's great, but I don't think that's very helpful when you're in the moment of grief. Like, I think, yes, we hope, and I've told you here, that most people go on to have healthy pregnancies, but that doesn't take away from the grief of the miscarriage that you're having, and that deserves to be recognized.
Mm-hmm. Another weird thing that sometimes happens after a person has a miscarriage is that suddenly all these other people come out of the woodwork and say, oh, yeah, I've had miscarriages too, or I've had several. For instance, I could think of a patient who once told me that, you know, she experienced a miscarriage. And only after that did she find out that her own mother had had multiple miscarriages, something like 4 or 5, which could actually be medically relevant, which actually made me sort of go down a different pathway of thinking about causes of miscarriage. But this secrecy that is around miscarriage and how the people don't talk about it, it's almost like you don't get to hear about the club until you're a member of the club. The world's worst club.
That's right.
But with the best people. It's sort of a shame that people don't feel like they can talk about it until somebody else talks about it, that they've experienced it. Because suddenly something that feels very isolating is not so isolating. And it has become more common. And I think that would really help allow people to make it more socially acceptable to grieve a miscarriage, frankly. So we've talked a lot about all the things that you should not say. But what should you say? How can you talk to someone after they tell you that they have had a miscarriage?
Well, I think the saying, like the obvious thing, like, I'm sorry this happened to you. This must be really difficult and I'm here for you. So I think it's just not trying to get that person to brush it off and move on to the next thing. It's to just be there and be present and help them recognize that this is real grief and that they deserve to feel it and that you're there to support them through that time.
Mm-hmm. And this goes back to my validate the feelings, because all of the feelings are valid and they are true, and they can be a weird mishmash of feelings that feel a complete 180 to each other happening at the same time or at different times, and that's okay. And that's totally normal. And I think you're spot on. I think we all try and fix things when somebody tells us about something. Like, we want to cheer people up, we want to make people feel better, but that's just not the time for it. Sometimes it's better just to let people sit with their feelings, be in their emotions, be there for support, and go from there. If you or someone you know is struggling after having a miscarriage, please, please, please reach out for help and support. There's many resources available, as we talked about, Oasis or a therapist or a family doctor, or reach out to your fertility clinic. Please remember, it is okay to ask for help.
I hope that you found this discussion helpful. And if you've had a miscarriage, please know that you're not alone. It is very common and that it is absolutely not your fault.
And that's a wrap for today, Superhumans.
If you're looking to connect, get social with us. Follow us on YouTube and Instagram at My Fertility Podcast or visit us online at markandfertility.com. And don't forget, follow, subscribe, and share your favorite episode.
Thanks for listening to My Fertility Podcast and for being a vital part of our community. We know you've got this.
We're signing off until next Tuesday.
If you found this episode of My Fertility Podcast helpful, please take a moment to head over to the review section and leave us your thoughts. Your reviews and comments are incredibly valuable to us and help guide future episodes. We also welcome you to direct your questions to info@myfertilitypodcast.com.
My Fertility Podcast is produced by Rabbit Media Inc. in conjunction with Dr. Garcia and Dr. Weiss.
Music from Mixkit, Life is a Dream by Michael Ramir C.
My Fertility Podcast is not intended to replace any type or variation thereof professional medical, health, or legal advice, nor should the content be taken as medical advice. Please contact your primary healthcare professional regarding any medical questions you may have. The information presented in this podcast is based on the knowledge and understanding of the host at the time of recording. Medical knowledge is constantly evolving, and new research may change the understanding of health-related topics. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, we do not guarantee the completeness, accuracy, or timeliness of the content. The views expressed in this podcast by guests are not those of the host or the management. This podcast is not intended to impose any type of discrimination. My Fertility Podcast and its management are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of this podcast.